hope or this psychologically beneficial process for people to believe that someone else is listening to them or someone else cares or that there's something better in an afterlife. So if we had a world, I guess, without religion, do you think perhaps we'd be more cynical as cultures because we wouldn't have kind of that distant hope of something being better?
No, that wouldn't be the result.
Do you think we'd be more active as societies to actually
care about each other?
Yeah, to
Quite
take
possibly.
matters into our own hands because we don't have that to kind of put it on?
Right. Religion hates a vacuum. Translation, the human species is not dumb collectively. We will have compensations, if not one form, another. So that's why humanism is often proposed in the West as a hopeful alternative to traditional theological supernaturalisms by providing ethical principles, a political institution, we call it democracy, right? And then the existential compensations where humanists are no longer interested in worrying about the fate of their immortal soul because they no longer accept the indoctrination that they have an immortal soul or that there is a heaven or hell to worry about. That doesn't mean dying all of a sudden becomes a pleasant idea. But it might be the case that humanist ethical principles teach us that what is far more important and valuable and worthy of surviving us is not our private personal center of consciousness or ego or our personality twisted by life, but the finer points of our character and intelligence and knowledge and wisdom that we inherited from past generations, transformed and passed on. And that's a comforting thought.
You first suggested that, later actually, suggested that humans will always ask existential questions like the why questions, why are we here, why is the universe the way it is, and suggested that science can't answer those questions. But in the same way as not directly, right? But in the same way as belief in a soul, do you think it's possible that wanting to ask those questions could be kind of the result of indoctrination of religion, and that without it, humans might not ask those questions?
Like, where do we come from and what's going to happen to us?
Well, not necessarily. Well. In a more cosmological sense, I guess. You know, in the sense of why does the universe exist? What is the purpose of life? Things like that.
It's possible, sure. Right. Our culture may evolve a sort of thin humanism that is content with a social structure and a politics and a way of comforting each other that just doesn't show any interest nor teach it to children about how we are connected with the alpha and the omega, the beginning and end. And I mean, that's possible. What I'm simply suggesting to you is because we have such vast brains capable of asking those questions that they will end up being perennial. For any society that manages to quell them and silence them, the children ask them, unbidden and innocent. They do, right? They do. So I think they'll be forever with us. What we want to avoid is letting them become obsessions or fertile soil for fanaticisms. And that's why a positive humanism should manage them, keep them within the boundaries of reason and science, but let us enjoy them with enthusiasm as part of the gusto of life. Humanism is not all dour naysaying and ethical rules. It tells us that we can appreciate the wonders and that it is appropriate for human beings to try to feel like they can have a relationship with the vast and the deep. And that's okay, because if you're frightened about not having a relationship, that can be a breeding ground for supernaturalistic religions to step in and say, see, I told you nature was inadequate. You need us and our expensive priests who are going to save your soul. All right, swing back over here. Get it? Quiet question. A return question.
Yeah. Oh, I just found that last question particularly interesting because since the beginning of time, humans have always had questions. Where does the sun rise? Why did it come from? Why does it rise? And religion was made, well, that's the sun god Ra, and he comes up to say hi, and now we can see things. But eventually, human inquiry eventually led to, okay, well, we live on a planet and the sun's in the middle and stuff, And I mean, I don't think that it's because that without religion, people wouldn't inquire. People would still find out. I don't think the Earth being flat was a religious problem so much so as it was just like a human. We were interested, is the Earth flat? And then we found out that it was round. Like people are gonna find out regardless. So yeah, I just wanted to voice that, I guess.
Excellent.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Stimulate. Way in the back.
Because of the conflict, do you ever feel, one way back here, because of the conflict between fundamentalism and logic and reason, do you ever feel like there'll be a middle ground? And that's basically current thought, that there'll be a middle ground between extreme fundamentalism and logic and thought, just a compromise, I assume.
What do you mean by logic and thought?
Just reason, as far as,
Right.
It seems like fundamentalism is a lack of reason, like almost that in the past few years that it's arose because of conflict, because it's basically a survival instinct of that group to feel like, we're being attacked because of
Right.
logic and reason. Do you feel that there's a common ground, that there's a compromise there?
No, and I'll tell you why. The reason is because fundamentalism is a peculiarly distorted form of theological superstructure that happens periodically when a civilization or culture is under the most intenses of strains and competitions. It resorts to outright abandonment of any other mode of knowing save that of the peculiar preserve of only that religion. So that's where you get the denial that science has anything to it, and that we have the only right stories, and we don't need any other form of knowledge, and you have to be completely dependent on this vertical relationship with the Almighty, or right, whatever it is, right? So such an extreme abandonment of a wider sort of useful, practical, social rationality in the wider culture, I mean, that's weird. I mean, that right? So you have to understand the socio-cultural civilization processes to lead to these intensifications. Directly confronting them after they are full-blown fundamentalisms with reason and science is, of course, now useless. They're not listening. So what we might do is instead use humanism and democracy as preventative measures. Now, of course, by the time you've got a nasty fundamentalism going, it might be too late. But that's what humanism is. I think of humanism more as preventative measures to try to improve the chances of future generations, rather than a Band-Aid for all the garbage we've gotten ourselves into now. Right? So now what do you do when you've got right? There's no compromise. Right? But what our fundamentalist friends need to hear is humanist messages. Right? We need to do better at trying to sympathize where they're coming from. Try to examine more closely the socio-cultural, political, economic, war conditions that have led to them. To tell them, look, it's not that you're, crazy.